The conclave has started. Over in Rome, cardinals are voting for the new pope.
Our man Tim Stanley is there. He'll have all the details as we wait for the white smoke. Well, literally, you could hear the noise from St. Peter's Square because Tim Stanley is there. Tim, tell us what you can see and what is happening.
I'm standing outside the Vatican press office. I am in St. Peter's Square, which is that big thing behind me. That's where the Basilica is. They, I believe, have already had their Mass, and I suspect they're on their way into the Sistine Chapel to start voting now. I am surrounded by thousands and thousands of tourists. I'm actually not quite sure why, because smoke isn't expected for several hours yet. I was amused earlier that Fox News has actually put on a live cam outside the chimney. I think it's very strange. That is some Catholic dedication, because there is nothing happening right now.
People did watch a lettuce here for days and days whilst Liz Truss was Prime Minister and nothing happened. So people will watch almost anything, to be frank. But just talk us through the logistics. So the doors are locked, I think, is it 3 p.m. your time? And then what happens?
Right, so around 133 cardinals are entitled to vote. That figure may have dropped to 132 because a cardinal from Kenya claims that he wasn't invited to take part. Bless him, the Vatican has replied that no one is invited to take part. He's just entitled to take part and he should have turned up. But his diocese has issued a statement suggesting he's unwell. You've got to remember that. We're dealing with men in their 70s, the cutoff age is 80. So you're dealing with, a lot of cranky old men right now. And they will go into the Sistine Chapel where they will sit behind individual desks. And voting takes place in complete silence. Each cardinal has a card in front of them. They will write the name on it of the person who they believe should be pope. They will then advance to an urn in front of the altar, which is where you can see in Sistine Chapel Michelangelo's Last Judgment. And there they will swear an oath to say that they are voting without any personal interest or influence, and they'll pop their vote in the urn. All the votes are then tallied to make sure that the correct number is in there. If they're not, they're destroyed. It starts all over again. And assuming they are, the names are then added up, and we'll have our first result. That result is not going to produce the 2/3 necessary to elect the next pope. We know that much. So what we'll see later on this afternoon is some black smoke coming out of the chimney, which is created in order to signal that a pope has not yet been elected. This will carry on for several days. There will be 4 votes each day until one candidate finally gets the 2/3 majority necessary to win. And then that person, there'll be some black smoke, some white smoke that will come out of the chimney to indicate that it's all over. And they'll come out into the balcony and we'll finally see who the next pope is.
And Tim, unlike the David Lammy tweet of yesteryear, where he suggested white and black smoke could in some way be inherently racist, that's not the case here. Black smoke obviously denounces no decision and white smoke declares that a pope has been chosen. Historically, Tim, that process has taken a long time in the past. I think I read in your great piece about what you're doing out there in Rome and how the whole process happens. And by the way, you can see that on the Telegraph website. I read that at one point, that whole process took 2 years. How long do you think this process is going to take?
And at the end of that, the Romans got so sick that they reduced the rations of food going into bread and water, and they eventually tore the roof off the chapel so that the cardinals would be exposed to the elements and forced to come to a decision. We're not sure how long this will take, and how long it takes is actually an interesting question because this is a very different kind of college of electoral cardinals. This one was stacked by Pope Francis. About 80% of them were chosen by the late pontiff. They were chosen in order to better represent the world, and they're also slightly younger. So the youngest cardinal is just 45. And the result is that older cardinals are said to want to have a quick decision. Younger cardinals, many of whom just don't really know Rome, don't know any of the other cardinals, they're said to want a longer process. So because the makeup of the conclave is so new, we can't make any sure bets at the moment about how long this is all going to take.
Tim, you wrote in that marvellous article that this is about clarity versus charity. A notion of, is the Pope there to show theological leadership? And does the Pope and the Church have a broader political role? How is that playing in the conclave that you're going to be watching over the next hours and days?
Right, so to break that down, what that means is Pope Francis emphasized a church for the poor, particularly for migrants and those who felt marginalized and excluded. He wanted one which was less hierarchical, greater role for lay people, greater role for women. And in his own inimitable style, he sometimes did that by being a disruptor. He would say things that would take people by surprise, and conservatives say, sow some confusion about the church's teachings. For instance, on gay relationships and gay sex. This is the Pope who famously said, "Who am I to judge about someone confessing to having had gay sex?" So while there are some in the Vatican who would like to continue the Pope's style of, if you like, democratizing the church, there are those who say, no, what we actually need to do now is clarify precisely what Pope Francis meant, make some of the things he started to do, like fighting corruption, actually work, and to re-emphasize clear church teachings. Now, in terms of how it's going to play out in the conclave, well, because this has been stacked by Francis, and I can't emphasize that enough, we're going to end up with a Pope who basically agrees with Francis's view of the church. So in terms of substance, we're going to see much of the same. What we're going to see that will be different is style, because even those who are firm supporters of Francis acknowledge that the church is a bit rudderless at the moment, it's got real money problems, and it possibly needs someone at the top who's just very certain and stable. And that's why, one of the reasons why the front runner right now is regarded to be Cardinal Parolin, who is the number 2 in the Vatican. A classic example of a solid diplomat and bureaucrat, and someone who just knows who to ring to get something fixed in the Vatican.
Can I just express a preference now for Pier Battista Piazzabola? Because I literally saw that name as one of the runners and riders and thought, this is actually a joke. But this particular cardinal, who is of the Latin Patriarch of Jerusalem, is in the front running, isn't he, Tim?
That is correct. He's regarded as a likely consolidation candidate, someone who might be able to unify. I think what's interesting about him is he is Latin Patriarch in Jerusalem, which means he has an understanding of the Middle East crisis. And we got to remember, this is not just a political event; it's a religious event. And we talk about the Pope, the cardinals being guided by the Holy Spirit. We get the Pope that God wants, not necessarily who we expect. And in the same way that the election of John Paul II, a Polish Pope, happened at the height of the Cold War, to me it makes some logical sense that a cardinal who understands the Middle East, understands the dangers of Islamism, but also has sympathy for the Gazan people, I think it would make sense to see that kind of person elected.
You just touched there, Tim, on money issues for the Vatican. It's interesting that there is also the slightly prosaic issue of budget problems, unfunded pension liabilities, inability to control the budget. There have been allegations over the decades, of course, of fraud. I mean, how much is this job not only obviously the leader of the Catholic Church, but also the chief executive?
Yeah, that's a good way of thinking about it. The Pope is not directly in control of the accounts, of course, but they are the person who sets the tone and appoints the people who are necessary to clean things up. They have huge pension liabilities. They're running a big deficit. And that's one reason also why they possibly need to build some bridges with, say, the Americans, because the American Catholics, they're kind of divided. There's a liberal Kennedy wing, there's a Trumpy conservative wing, but either way, you've got to be nice to the Americans because they have a lot of donor money.
The other thing, Tim, just picking up on your point about Pope Francis having loaded the cardinals with some of his own over the course of his 12-year papacy, is I would assume from that great many of these cardinals have never been in this conclave before. And apologies for the perhaps lowbrow nature of this question, but do you think they've watched Conclave the film in order to find out what they're meant to be doing?
I haven't asked, but it wouldn't entirely surprise me. I mean, like the 45-year-old Ukrainian, what does he know about all this stuff? There are a lot of people who are learning about how the process works, and they will defer to the older people who've been to this rodeo a couple of times before. And that's where you'll start to see some of the negotiating within the conclave itself. As I said, voting takes place in silence, but then there's a kind of a canvassing process over the meals. They're going to live together, they're going to eat together, they will get to know each other, and from that a decision will arise.
When you look at the candidates, you've spoken about Cardinal Parolin. Camilla, you've mentioned Pier Battista Piazzabola. does it matter the country that the Pope is from? It has been pointed out, particularly by many Italian Catholics, that there hasn't been an Italian Pope for, I think, now 3 popes, is that right? And therefore is part of the thinking that we really need, or some people in the Catholic Church might think, given that Rome is the home or the headquarters of the Catholic Church, it's time for an Italian cardinal to become Pope.
Yeah, some people will make that judgment. Undoubtedly, that's a part of it. I mean, this is the Church of Rome. It is very much an Italian institution. I mean, I hope you can, I don't know how much you can see in the background, but I love Italy. It's a country where 4 men do one man's job and they all wear a different uniform. And the church is exactly like that too. I mean, just from where I'm standing, I can see nuns in white, blue, and pink. And of course, there are the cardinals in their extraordinary red, which symbolizes the blood of St. Peter. This is very much an Italian institution. And in fact, it's a global institution as well. When you're a Catholic, you're a little bit Italian, a little bit Irish, a little bit Filipino. And it's really wonderful to be here in St. Peter's right now, surrounded by people from all over the world, representatives of a universal church. I can understand the move towards the urge to get a new world pope. Someone from outside of Europe, because Europe is where the faith is declining. Africa and Asia in particular are where it's growing. But if you do get a new world pope, don't expect that you're necessarily going to get a pope in Francis's image. Latin American liberals, the Latin Americans tend to be quite left-wing, are said to be pushing back hard against an African pope. Why? Because the Africans come from a very culturally conservative continent, and they will not tolerate things like blessings of gay relationships. So even as the church looks more and more like a Benetton ad and reaches out to the rest of the world, it doesn't necessarily push it in a particular political direction.
Tim, we know you're going to be there for the duration until we see that white smoke for the Telegraph, so we will no doubt keep on checking in on you. Final question, how many gelato have you had so far since you landed in Rome?
I've had one. It's very difficult when you're in Italy not to eat ice cream or to smoke. And yesterday, I just found myself instinctively buying a pack of Marlboro Gold and smoking half of it.
Tim.
You've got to be very careful about that. You know, most people come back from Italy with a belly. I come back from it with a hacking cough. So I've got to be very disciplined. No more cigarettes.
You are literally in the centre of self-discipline there, surrounded by cardinals and nuns. Will you get a grip of yourself, Stanley, please? But thank you, as ever, for joining us on the Daily Tea.
Good.
Thanks so much, Tim.
I love the left to right spectrum that we have on the Telegraph website. Have you seen it? Where you can tell where the Pope is in the kind of ideological scheme of things. Because at the end of the day, this isn't just a religious decision, is it? It is a political one.
Yes, and on that infographic we have on our website, as Tim was explaining, most of the candidates are to the progressive side of this left-right divide. And I think it does come to this key question: what role does not only the Catholic Church, but the Christian Church in general have in actual politics and broader, obviously many discussions connected to faith, but broader political issues? And if you look at, a lot of the arguments around Islam is that it has become hyper politicized and political, and has taken its political sort of duties much more aggressively than the Christian Church has. And lots of people joined the Catholic Church because it was more solid on issues, cultural issues maybe, and progressive issues. But Pope Francis has taken them on a journey that's made them more liberal. And there's been some criticism that it needs to sort of go back to basics and be stronger on some of those culture discussions around things like same-sex marriage, for example.
Is there some kind of correlation here between today's episode and yesterday's when we were talking about faith, family and freedom? Because although previously, in recent years, we haven't really seen, famously, Tony Blair, according to Alistair Campbell, didn't do God. We haven't seen a kind of Bible-bashing administration in this country like we've witnessed with the rise of the Republicans under Trump and Vance in America. Having said that, that notion of faith and restoring some degree of faith, and therefore talking about so-called British values, which you and I have, might actually be quite a potent formula come 2029 in this country. It's certainly something that we've agreed yesterday Nigel Farage is trying to harness.
And we've seen in the polling that the public are eager for that. I think we have moved, just like we've moved in politics, I think we have moved in our respect for faith being restored. If you think about, the big, decades of history, the 60s and the 70s and the 80s saw a real move against the idea of faith being part of the political conversation. And I think that since the financial crisis, since the breakdown in trust in established secular institutions, people are looking back towards faith for some of the guidance that people need in their lives, which are now so disrupted. So I think this vote goes far beyond who's the leader of the Catholic Church and the 1.2 billion followers of that faith into what are the conversations that the Church, that Islam, that Judaism should be involved in. And I think that's a positive thing.